Hi everyone, welcome back to Serger Tip Clips. Well, I have some very exciting news for all of you L890 owners. There is a new foot in town. It is the C28 Clear Cover Chainstitch Foot. And I can't wait to show you all of the different little features that they've built into this foot. So let's get started. The C28 Clear Cover Stitch Foot was very, very well thought out. And I want to point out some of the features on this while we're looking at it close up. On the toe of the foot, you have 5 different marks. The long black lines designate the left, center, and right chain needle positions when you're stitching. The little short marks designate, and I had to look twice at the instructions to understand this, they designate the right and the left edges of the little window on the top of the foot. And this horizontal black mark is going to tell you exactly where your needle or needles are going to be positioned when you put them in the fabric, which to me is so smart and very helpful. That was a very nice addition to the foot. Also, another thing, and I think you can pretty well see it here, is that they have extended the indicator ridge lines all the way up to the window. And these are great for very precise positioning of your stitching. And if you're doing something like a stacked cover stitch where you're using a wide, narrow, and then a chain stitch, and you want to get your stitching exactly in the middle, these are super helpful for that. But also, they've been very thoughtful about the width of the foot too. And I want to show you that on this, and I think I'll use the thick line at the 1 inch mark to show you this. I'm going to put the 1/4 inch mark right at the edge of the fabric, but you can see that the right chain needle falls exactly a 1/4 inch from the right edge of the presser foot. And you can see that the same thing is true with the left edge of the presser foot and the left cover chain stitch needle, that it is precisely on that 1/4 inch mark. So for quilters, bag makers, or for any type of pattern that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance and you'd like to use a chain stitch for the seam on that, this is an excellent reference point to use for that. Let's take a look at the stitching and see if these markings are absolutely accurate. I've got my fabric lined up precisely with the right edge of the presser foot. My machine is set up for stitch number 16, which means I have the right chain needle in. Stitch length is 3.0. And let's make sure that my foot is exactly on the edge, which now it is. And then afterwards, we'll measure that stitching line. Locking a stitch off with my locking fork. Okay, this looks good. So let's go over to the table and really measure this. Okay, I've got my ruler. That is a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, right on the money. Now let's test that left position chain needle for stitch number 33. Same setup, just left needle. I've got the left edge of the presser foot aligned precisely with the edge of the fabric. lock it off. And let's put it on the table and check that one out. And that one measures exactly 1/4 of an inch also. So that gives you a lot of flexibility depending on the type of project that you're working on, whether or not it's more convenient to stitch it on the right or the left side of the presser foot. That's fantastic. Let's look at one more reason these marks are so great for decorative stitching. Let's take a look at how great foot number C28 is for a regular cover stitch for a garment hem. This window is going to be a game changer when it comes to getting that perfect finish and not having to guess at where the needle is. I prepared the hem the way I have talked about in perfect cover stitching over the hump, and I can refer you to that tip clip to take a look at that. So my stitch length is on 3.7. I have serger cone thread in both needles as well as the chain looper. So let's get started. And typically I like to stitch kind of inside the circle. So you can see I've got this turned inside out to get started. And I never like to start going over a seam. So I'm going to start a little bit ahead of it. And I'll reiterate what I've told you in over the hump. Now my needles are getting close to that seam allowance. I am going to make sure my needle stops down. I'm going to raise the presser foot to let that seam relax. I'm going to increase my stitch length up to 4 to get over that extra seam allowance and compensate lengthwise on the stitch for those extra layers. And now I can go back to my original length. Let that seam relax a little bit underneath there and keep going. Okay, so now let me just take a couple more stitches so I can see this in the camera. Okay, so you can see I'm just coming up to my beginning stitches, and I'm going to separate my left and right needle threads. Make sure my stitching is aligned with the indicator ridges and these great marks on the toe of the foot. But the nice thing is that now with the clear foot, I don't have to peek under the foot to see, have I reached those beginning stitches or not. I can see right through it and just take one more stitch probably. That will bring me right up to the starting line. Maybe one more. Okay. Needles all the way up. Raise the presser foot. And I want to lock my stitches in place, the locking fork. And you'll see those needle threads disappear to the wrong side because the chain looper thread is still attached. But let's take a look at that. Look how perfect that finish is. These are my beginning needle threads, so let me just snip those off because from first to last stitch, as I've mentioned before, a cover stitch is locked as well as a chain stitch. So you can see how fantastic this foot is for giving you an absolutely precise finish on that cover stitch. Super easy with this foot. Let's look at how great these lines are for creating the stacked cover stitch. I've done a tip clip on this, and it's actually 3 stitches that are stacked on top of each other. And just like building a wedding cake, the first tier or the bottom base of the cake is the widest, and that is using stitch number 22, the 3-thread wide cover stitch. I have the left and right covered chain stitch needles in. I have a 12-weight decorative thread in my chain looper. I am stitching with the interfacing side up so that the decorative thread shows on the right side of the fabric. Okay, and my stitch length is 3.5. That's variable. Okay, lock that off. Out. Let's take a look at that first line. And I use kind of a bright, kind of a tropical orange thread on that one. So that's the wide one. Now I'm going to switch over to stitch number 24 using the center and right cover chain stitch needles. Now I've switched my needles over to the center and right needles for stitch 24, and I've changed out the color on the decorative 12-weight thread in the chain looper. And here's something interesting. Just as I was aligning my needles so that this line of stitching would go down the center of the first row of stitching, I realized that if I use this little mark that is aligned with the right edge of the window, that keeps my stitching right down the middle on this one. So let's see how this works out. I'm pretty sure it is. I think it's going to be pretty centered, which this will be like a whole new thing. Let's take a look. Yeah. Take a look at that. Well, I'm a little off here and there, but if I keep it right on the center, as I did here, that stitching is right down the middle of the first wide cover stitch. Now we've got one more to go with the chain stitch. Now we're ready for the top of the stack cover stitch. So I am set up for stitch number 32 with my center chain needle in, and my stitch length I've got on 3, and I've again changed the color of the chain looper thread. And I am going to experiment. I'm going to try to run my outer line of the first line of stitching, the wide cover stitch, right along that first one, because I think that will keep my chain stitch centered within these 2 stitches. So let's try that and experiment. Okay, so you can see the orange thread was the first bottom tier of the wedding cake. It was the wide cover stitch. The turquoise or aqua is the narrow cover stitch, and that kind of grapey purple is the chain stitch. And you can see how nicely that came out. I think I went a little haywire over here, a little bit off course, but that's okay. And with the stack cover stitch, I do want to emphasize that even if your stitching isn't absolutely perfectly centered on top of the previous line of stitching, don't worry about it, because it will still look beautiful. It's amazing how pretty this stitch is. But this foot is an incredible help for that. It really is making it so much easier to make sure everything does stay as centered as I can possibly keep it. Be sure to pre-order the C28 foot from your dealer so you're one of the first ones to get this fantastic foot. You'll love using it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll get back to you quickly with an answer. Thanks for joining me today. Happy sewing and serging.